Russia will be held accountable if it invades. And it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia if they further invade Ukraine, and that our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy. And, we're going to fortify our NATO allies. I told them on the eastern flank, if in fact he does invade, I've already shipped over $600 million worth of sophisticated equipment, defensive equipment, to the Ukrainians. The cost of going into Ukraine in terms of physical loss of life for the Russians, they'll be able to prevail over time, but it's going to be heavy. It's going to be real. It's going to be consequential. In addition to that, Putin has a stark choice. Either de-escalation or diplomacy, confrontation of the consequences. And look, I think you're going to see, for example, if they invade, they're going to pay. Their banks will not be able to deal in dollars.
There are major things happening right now in this world that are not being properly communicated to the majority of the world. They are, of course, mentioned, and the media does tell everyone that these issues are building. But the intensity that the storyline is escalating does not seem to be in the awareness of the general public. The world is being pushed into world conflict. The governments of the world are preparing their forces and sending out their troops. They're not only focused on COVID. They are making preparations militarily and financially. There are a bunch of major moves that have been escalating continuously since December of last year, 2021. It is important that we have our eyes opened and live within proper expectations. Because if you live with blinders on to all of this, you are simply living in a world that is waiting to be blindsided. And those that live like that run a huge risk of being overcome. It is better to live with knowledge and understanding, not to be asleep, but awake. You want to be proactive rather than reactive. It is important to understand what is going on in this world. They are planning to escalate the situation in Ukraine to war, which will spill into massive conflict that will change the world forever. With every mention of inflation, the dollar is collapsing very fast. It is important to understand what is happening and what it means for the world, so that these agendas do not steer you into the darkness that is meant to take everyone into their new world. You must be awake and aware. So we need to discuss what is happening with the conflict in Ukraine. Let's begin. Okay, so last month in December, I spoke about these war drums being beaten. Since I made that video, things are of course not de-escalating. They have been escalating tremendously. If you remember, in late November, it was being said that Russia was amassing troops at its border with Ukraine.
Ukraine's defense minister says Russia could be planning to invade his country as soon as next month. The top military official says intelligence shows nearly 100,000 Russian troops in Crimea right now. Russia invaded Crimea and took control of the region in 2014. The Kremlin says Crimea has historically been aligned with Russia, but Ukraine says the region was effectively stolen. Either way, the troop buildup near the border is getting the U.S. and other Ukrainian allies to take notice. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Moscow there would be, quote, severe costs in the event of an escalation.
Like I said, things have not simmered down, but they have escalated. And I think it is important to go through a full timeline of what has occurred since December up until now, because this is something that they are not doing. During the time of that last video, Putin was drawing up his red lines.
Мы куда идем-то? Зачем мы все это делаем? Вот это создание таких угроз для нас и есть красные линии. Но я надеюсь, что до этого не дойдет.
Okay, you see. So let's review what has happened since that last video was made and Putin made those red lines. Shortly after that video, Biden said he's not accepting Putin's red lines.
Now to President Biden, who now says he will not accept Vladimir Putin's red line in Ukraine as Russia increases troops along the border.
What I am doing is putting together what I believe will be the most comprehensive and meaningful set of initiatives to make it very, very difficult for Mr. Putin to go ahead and do what people are worried he may do. But that's in play right now.
Now, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki would not elaborate much on that. She said they are considering economic tools, economic sanctions. When she was asked if any of those initiatives are military in nature, she sidestepped. Now,
so just a few days later, Biden and Putin held this virtual diplomatic conversation that was very clearly made for political theater. After this call, here in the United States, they propped up Joe Biden as playing hardball with Putin.
We're going to turn now to the high-stakes showdown with Russia. They're massing troops near Ukraine's border, and President Biden, in a video meeting, warned President Putin of serious consequences if he launched an invasion.
When this was all over, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called the meeting useful, but he says the White House still doesn't believe Putin has decided whether he will invade Ukraine. So officials are now saying the president laid out the consequences if Putin does decide to go through with this. We're talking about everything from strong economic measures to sending more weapons and military supplies to the region. As for American troops, Sullivan is telling me they expect allies to request additional support from troops in the region and that the U.S. will help. So here's where we are right now, George. Both the Kremlin and the White House say aides on both sides are going to continue this conversation, and President Biden is expected to speak with the president of Ukraine tomorrow.
Shortly after this, the G7 nations met and said they were completely unified against Russia invading Ukraine.
A festive welcome to Liverpool, belying the deadly serious nature of this meeting. G7 foreign ministers gathering while a crisis is growing over Russia and Ukraine. Britain's Foreign Secretary Liz Truss urging her counterparts to show unity.
We need to defend ourselves against the growing threats from hostile actors, and we need to come together strongly to stand up to aggressors who are seeking to limit the bounds of freedom and democracy.
Aggressor number one is Russia. It's now thought to have at least 100,000 troops on or near its border with Ukraine. And inside Ukraine, Russian-backed rebels are preparing for deepening hostilities, while their patron in Moscow keeps the world guessing. Vladimir Putin may be a seasoned veteran of realpolitik. The foreign ministers of the world's leading democracies aren't. 5 of the 7 meeting here have been in the job for less than a year. There's a lot at stake here. Can the G7 find the unity to deter Russia from aggression in Ukraine? But it's not just Russia. This is a test for the West that China and Iran will also be watching closely. But so far, the G7 seems to be having trouble finding its voice. As they left, only the EU's foreign policy chief talked to cameras, claiming G7 unity on Russia.
Today has been the occasion for the big democracies in the world to stand together behind Ukraine, supporting its sovereignty and its territorial integrity in front of any challenge, any threat that can come from Russia.
If Russia is to listen, the G7 will need their message to be clearly heard.
So after the meeting, they worked on doing just that and began to escalate their rhetoric from the different world governments.
As we see Russian forces massing on the Ukrainian border, can we be reminded that Russia is also continuing cyber attacks, attempted assassinations, using gas as a political weapon, holding illegally territory in the Crimea, in Georgia, intimidating the West, and interfering in Western elections? How much does the government understand that President Putin is conducting a hybrid war against the West? And how is the government responding to it?
Excellent question. I thank my right honourable friend, and I'm afraid he is absolutely right in what he says, and he's also right to stress the particular urgency of the situation. He's right in what he says about hybrid warfare and all the other interventions, but there is a particular crisis that we face on the border with Ukraine, where Russian troops have been massing for some time, as the House knows. And I told President Putin on Monday what I think everybody in the G7 and more widely is agreed, that if Russia were so rash, so mad as to engage in an invasion of sovereign territory of Ukraine, then there would be an extremely tough package of economic sanctions mounted by our allies, mounted by the UK and our friends around the world. There would also, of course, be support for Ukraine. There would inevitably be the build-up of NATO forces in the periphery regions, and as I told President Putin, I believe any such action would be catastrophic, not just for Russia and for Ukraine, for the world.
Tensions at the Russia-Ukraine border are showing no signs of diminishing, and the prolonged crisis has angered the West. In the latest, France has sent warnings to Russia. In case Ukraine is attacked, the Emmanuel Macron government has threatened strategic consequences. This comes after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz warned Russia in his first parliament speech as a chancellor. Scholz said that Russia will pay a high price if it actually invaded Ukraine.
Now, to be clear, Russia has continuously said they did not plan on invading Ukraine. But this has not stopped the rhetoric and threats. They have been increasing the rhetoric and the threats, and the talk of conflict did not de-escalate. From all of that rhetoric, Putin then spoke out about Russia being increasingly provoked. He said if things were going to de-escalate, the West needs to provide him guarantees that certain actions were not going to be taken.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin is threatening a tough response if the West does not back down over Ukraine. Moscow has amassed tens of thousands of troops on the border with the former Soviet Republic and is demanding that NATO guarantee it never admit the country into the alliance or deploy weapons or troops there. Speaking to military officials in Moscow on Tuesday, Putin said Russia had no room for retreat.
What they do now on Ukraine territory, or they try to do, they plan to do, is happening not thousands of kilometers from our state border, but at our gates. They must understand that we have nowhere to retreat. Armed conflicts and bloodshed are absolutely not something we would choose. We do not want such a scenario. We want to solve problems using political and diplomatic tools, but also to have explicit, understandable, well-defined legal guarantees.
The US on Tuesday said it was preparing talks with Putin over his security concerns, but many of the Russian leader's demands are seen as non-starters by Washington and its partners. Karen Donfried, the US State Department's top diplomat for Europe, said Washington would continue to send military equipment and supplies to Ukraine.
President Putin openly wielding a diplomatic carrot and stick at his news conference today. New satellite images this week show Russia's continuing military escalation on Ukraine's border. But the Russian leader suggesting talks with the US are gaining traction, and war with Ukraine is not inevitable.
We don't want that. It is not our choice.
At other times, Putin sounding belligerent, directly addressing Western leaders with uncompromising demands.
You must give us the guarantees. It is up to you, and you must do this immediately, right now.
The Kremlin insists NATO abandon military activity in Eastern Europe and not admit Ukraine as a member, righting wrongs, Putin believes, from the Gorbachev era. But that draft Kremlin treaty already rejected by Washington ahead of potential negotiations in early January.
We just haven't finalized the details of those, so that's really the next step.
Meanwhile, tonight, a ceasefire reinstated in eastern Ukraine, meaning, one Ukrainian official said today, the holidays should be peaceful. The question tonight, is President Putin deliberately insisting on the impossible, forcing any talks to fail, or is he negotiating? The answer may determine war or peace in Ukraine.
The United States has rejected his calls for guarantees and continued to send supplies and equipment to Ukraine. And because they refused to make those guarantees, Russia said there's a high risk of conflict over Ukraine.
High risk of armed conflict over Ukraine, Russian Defense Ministry warns. Russia's deputy defense minister warned foreign ambassadors of a high risk of conflict between the country and its neighbor Ukraine one day after President Vladimir Putin threatened diverse military and technical responses if the West doesn't address his stated concerns. These latest messages from Moscow are the kind that have had US and other Western officials on edge that Putin will launch an assault on Ukraine, even after President Joe Biden warned him doing so would bring massive penalties.
And Putin requested another talk with Biden. This talk happened at the end of 2021.
President Biden is gearing up for a high-stakes phone call with Vladimir Putin later today as tensions escalate between the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine. The White House says Moscow requested the call. We know this will be the second time this month the two leaders have spoken. It comes as Russia says it's withdrawn about 10,000 troops from the Ukrainian border. However, that's just a fraction of the estimated 100,000 forces the country has mobilized across the region, sparking global fears of a possible invasion. For more on this, Imtiaz, what can we expect from today's call between President Biden and President Putin? Do we know why Putin requested the call?
Hey, good to talk to you. Well, officially, we've been told the two leaders will speak by phone later tonight, where they'll discuss, security talks in January that are planned between the two countries, as well as the broader situation in Europe. But what many people are hoping is that this call is going to be the beginning of a pathway to real diplomacy that can lead to a genuine de-escalation to a situation that's being described as, quote, the most dangerous it's been in 30 years.
But this talk did not bring the expected de-escalation as the reporting alluded to. So here we are in the beginning of 2022, and the rhetoric continues with Biden making more threats against Russia and speaking with Ukraine's president.
We will increase our presence in Europe with our NATO allies, and it will be a heavy price to pay for it.
And shortly after, Secretary of State Blinken makes statements preparing us for the narrative of war that is coming.
So how does Moscow explain its actions? With disinformation. It claims that Ukraine is threatening Russia, that Ukraine seeks to provoke a conflict, and that the Russian troop buildup and the tanks and heavy artillery are all purely defensive. That's like the fox saying it had to attack the henhouse because its occupants somehow pose a threat. We've seen this gaslighting before. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, it claimed that Ukraine was the aggressor to justify pre-planned military action. No one should be surprised if Russia instigates a provocation or incident.
Yeah, he said a lot. He then went on CNN and did an interview with Jake Tapper as well, and said what was coming next was the test of the paths that this conflict could take. It's either diplomacy or conflict.
Discussed the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Secretary Blinken, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start on these talks beginning tomorrow in Geneva. President Putin demanding that the U.S. pull some troops back out of Eastern Europe and rule out expanding NATO to include Ukraine. Are either of those on the negotiating table?
Neither of those is on the table, Jake, but here's where we are. There are two paths before us. There's a path of dialogue and diplomacy to try to resolve some of these differences and avoid a confrontation. The other path is confrontation and massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression on Ukraine. We're about to test the proposition about which path President Putin's prepared to take. We have important conversations between us starting tomorrow, as well as at NATO, as well as at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We're going to listen to Russia's concerns. They're going to have to listen to our concerns. If they are proceeding in good faith, we think we can make progress in addressing concerns on both sides that would reduce tensions and deal with improving security. We'll do that in close coordination with European allies and partners. We've made very clear to Russia that there's going to be nothing about Europe without Europe. But ultimately, this is up to President Putin to decide which path he's going to follow.
So over the next few days, Russia and NATO held those talks that Secretary Blinken said will be the temperature gauge to see what direction this conflict will be going.
First face-to-face talks between NATO and Russia in 2 years are underway in Brussels as they try to diffuse tensions over Russian troops massed on the Ukrainian border. Let's show you the moment the two sides arrived for that meeting, with generals and diplomats rubbing shoulders as they prepared to sit around the table. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister has described it as a moment of truth in relations between them. NATO members have repeatedly said they won't accept Russian demands, which include a halt to any eastward expansion of the alliance.
So, how did this summit with NATO and Russia go?
The U.S. and NATO rejected demands from Russia Wednesday during talks aimed at easing tensions in Eastern Europe. Russia wants to ensure Ukraine and other former Soviet nations are prevented from joining NATO. NATO backed the U.S., saying that demand is a non-starter.
We've already seen a significant effort by Moscow to make false claims about Europe, Ukraine, and the United States in an effort to excuse Russia's behavior and potentially create a pretext for Russia to further invade Ukraine. no one should be surprised if Russia spreads disinformation about commitments that have not been made, or if Moscow goes even further and instigates something as a pretext for further destabilizing activity. As you heard from the deputy this morning, we urge everyone not to fall for Moscow's continuing disinformation.
This was not an easy discussion, but that is exactly why this meeting was so important. We had a very serious and direct exchange on the situation in and around Ukraine and the implications for European security.
Well, the U.S. and its NATO allies appear to be no closer to resolving tensions with Russia over a military buildup at the Ukrainian border. High-stakes talks in Europe this week ended in an impasse. NATO has rejected several of Russia's demands, including a promise that Ukraine never be allowed to join the alliance. Moscow hasn't made any moves to pull back its troops from the border, and the White House is warning that the threat of a military invasion remains high.
So Russia then begins military drills.
Top focus this hour. 3,000 Russian troops conducted live fire exercises in western Russia on Tuesday, including areas close to Ukraine. This is according to reports filed by Interfax news agency. The announcement of the drills came a day after Russia and the United States held talks on Moscow's security proposals in Geneva. The meeting did not reach a breakthrough. Interfax quoted the Western Military District saying exercises will take place in Smolensk region near the Belarusian border and in the Voronezh, Belgorod, Bryansk regions closer to Ukraine. It also said that 300 units of military hardware would be involved. These exercises aimed at practicing firing from armored vehicles and firearms, organizing marches during active enemy sabotage, reconnaissance activity, and equipping strongholds.
And then there was a supposed massive cyber attack on Ukraine.
A cyber attack that knocked out several government websites in Ukraine on Friday is being seen as Russia's digital shot across the bow. While the origins of the attack have not yet been confirmed, U.S. officials are warning that Moscow is sending signals and apparently following a page from its own playbook as a prelude to an invasion of Ukraine. Troops remain ready on both sides of the border.
And Ukraine has said very assuredly they believe Russia was behind the cyber attack.
You believe Russia was behind this attack?
99,9%.
So now we are in this current week of January 17th. And the week has started with pure escalation and anticipation for war, which has sparked me to put this all together. The United States has said that this Russian conflict is imminent and is set to begin within the next 30 days or so.
So, as you all have heard us say many times, we are concerned that the Russian government is preparing for an invasion in Ukraine that may result in widespread human rights violations and war crimes should diplomacy fail to meet their objectives. As part of its plans, Russia is laying the groundwork to have the option of fabricating a pretext for invasion. And we've seen this before. We saw this before leading up to 2014, just to note, including through sabotage activities and information operations, by accusing Ukraine of preparing an imminent attack against Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, and the Russian military plans to begin these activities several weeks before a military invasion, which could begin between mid-January and mid-February. Again, but where things stand right now, President Putin has created this crisis by amassing 100,000 Russian troops along Ukraine's borders. This includes moving Russian forces into Belarus recently for joint exercises and conducting additional exercises on Ukraine's eastern border. So let's be clear. Our view is this is an extremely dangerous situation. We're now at a stage where Russia could at any point launch an attack in Ukraine. And what Secretary Blinken is going to go do is highlight very clearly there is a diplomatic path forward. It is the choice of President Putin and the Russians to make whether they are going to suffer severe economic consequences or not.
Understand, what they are saying here clearly sets the stage for whoever wants to get the war started. The United States could send off the first shot, and then now, because of this story, they could easily say it was Russia on a false flag operation. And so things are escalating. And since Tuesday, the United States has been pumping out heavy propaganda about Russia being on the brink of invading Ukraine. And you see it's getting deep because other countries have jumped on this fight now, with Canada sending troops to Ukraine.
CSOR is an elite group of Canadian Special Forces operators, and a small group of them is now in Ukraine. They're looking at potential options to support the Ukrainian government and planning for the possible evacuation of Canadian diplomatic personnel. Sources tell Global News the deployment is part of an attempt by NATO to deter Russian aggression.
Russia says its embassy in Kiev is operating as usual this morning, following a New York Times report that Moscow has been evacuating the families of staff in the Ukrainian capital. The Times cited a senior Ukrainian official as saying that 18 people, mostly family members of Russian diplomats, left Ukraine on January the 5th. Dozens of others followed. A U.S. official told the Times it had that information that such evacuation was coming. This all comes amid fears that Moscow is planning to invade Ukraine, a plan that Russia has denied.
This is how we have always seen war starting. We are clearly on a track for war, and it looks like Ukraine could be the catalyst of how things get started. The war drums are beating at the same time they are bringing down the economy for its fall. How I see it playing out is that they say Russia invades Ukraine, then the United States and their allies push sanctions that kick Russia out of the SWIFT banking system.
I've also signed an executive order authorizing new measures, including sanctions to address specific harmful actions that Russia has taken against U.S. interests,
causing Russia to lose access to the United States dollar.
If they invade, they're going to pay. Their banks will not be able to deal in dollars.
Russia and China have always warned that sanctions like this would backfire against the United States. Now, from those sanctions, Russia and China would react by completely dumping our debt, which will then lead to full-scale war. That's how I see events transpiring. I mean, I could be wrong, as I often am, when trying to predict what these people are doing. But what I do know is that it's clear that all of this is leading to war and financial collapse, because they're trying to reset the world. That's why we've been seeing such a strong drop in the world stock market since the beginning of the year. If you have been paying attention, the stock market has been on a very gradual, continuous decline since the beginning of the year. And our treasury bonds are increasing in their yield, signaling that people are dumping our debt, while inflation is continuing to skyrocket. I mean, oil prices hit 7-year highs just this week. You know, on Thursday night, I received an email from Bloomberg with this headline: "The collapse has begun." I mean, it's real crazy, because the majority of the people in this world don't even realize a collapse is due to happen. And Bloomberg is casually giving a headline showing that it is now underway. They are literally bringing the system down for the reset, and the general public are just completely asleep to it. When you really realize how many people are asleep to what is happening right in front of them, you really understand how things are going to turn out for the majority. Like I said earlier, the stock market has been falling since the beginning of the year. Now, the Federal Reserve is telling us that they're about to introduce a digital dollar. If you remember, I made a video about this very topic. The United States is provoking war with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And the value of our currency is reducing by the day. Inflation, inflation, inflation. The word of the year is inflation. This is something that has been reported over and over and over. Do not ever expect inflation to get better, but severely worse. Please understand that while they are saying inflation, they are actually speaking about the death of fiat currencies. The fiat currency system is collapsing. And right now, inflation is the convenient word to use that makes it seem controllable. Look at what's happening in Turkey. Please note and understand that the United States knew inflation was coming when they printed all of those trillions of dollars in stimulus during the start of the pandemic. And now they are going to try to raise rates, which is why we see our 10-year yield shooting high. It is important that you are paying attention and understand these key words that they are using, because when disaster strikes, there will not be a heads-up warning for preparation. You have been made awake to these things so that you are given time to be prepared and be ready. Understand, while the United States is provoking war with Russia and trying to curb rising inflation at home, while people are dumping the debt, they are still provoking war with China over Taiwan. This situation has not de-escalated as well. It just has taken a back seat in the news because of what is happening with Russia. Beijing just admitted that they have not ruled out the use of force on Taiwan. And Taiwan has said that the military threat from China against Taiwan is very dangerous.
How serious is the military threat from China against Taiwan?
I should say that it is very serious. If you look at the military preparation on the Chinese side, they have modernized their military hardwares and their training and also their services in the last few years. And if you look at the level of their military exercises around Taiwan, either in the air or on the surface, or their missile capabilities, is being improving tremendously in the last few years. They made a lot of investment in it, and they also openly talk about invading Taiwan. So this is a situation we see.
Then we have North Korea back at firing its missiles, accusing the United States of escalating tensions against them.
The latest North Korean missile test, conducted under the watchful eye of Kim Jong-un, was never a threat to the United States. But right after it was launched, the FAA grounded airline flights at major airports in the West, from Seattle to San Diego and from Las Vegas to Honolulu.
Hold the gate. They have a ground stop for all aircraft. Right now, they said don't let anybody move.
Full operations resumed in less than 15 minutes, and airlines reported no major delays. But there were some confused pilots and air traffic controllers.
Is it a security-related issue, or what, do we know anything?
I honestly have been given no information at this time. I've just been given information that we're in a ground stop.
The North Korean launch was immediately detected by satellites, and within minutes, the North American Air Defense Command inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado had determined it was not a threat to the U.S. The missile traveled 400 miles in what North Korea claimed was a test of a hypersonic missile.
Breaking news overnight, North Korea firing 2 ballistic missiles. This is the 3rd launch this month. This one happening just hours after Pyongyang accused the United States of, quote, escalating the situation with sanctions.
To you, Georgia, this morning, dramatic development. South Korea confirming North Korea firing not 1 but 2 short-range ballistic missiles from an airport near the capital, Pyongyang, launching the hypersonic missiles just 4 minutes apart and landing into the waters off the coast of Japan. This is their 4th rocket launch in the last 2 weeks. No damage was reported, but this is a clear provocation and a message that the North is trying to improve its weapons and delivery systems, as well as bolster the country's defenses. Now, these recent launches come after a diplomatic standoff between the U.S. and North Korea, rejecting the Biden administration's call to come back to the table without preconditions, saying Washington needs to first abandon its hostile policy.
All these things should be in your radar. But there's one last point you must be aware of and consider.
This is new this morning. We have learned in the last 30 minutes the White House is going to give away 400 million N95 masks to Americans for free. They'll hand them out at pharmacies and community health centers all around the United States. The masks will be available sometime next week. The program will be fully up and running by early February. The White House said the free masks are the largest deployment of personal protective equipment in the United States history. Right now, you can order your free at-home COVID tests online. The White House officially launching its federal website this morning. It opened up yesterday at a limited capacity for a test phase. The tests will ship to your home within 7 to 12 days. The website, covidtest.gov.
Biden has sent out free masks and free home COVID tests at a time where the feeling is that this pandemic should be going away. Or maybe the feeling of this pandemic going away is just how I feel, because all of this is just crazy stupid to me. Either way, them sending out these free tests and free masks says to me that the worst of this agenda is not over.
The 500 million, 500 million tests that are in the process of being acquired to ship to you homes for free. Today, I'm directing my team to procure an additional 500 million, additional 500 million more tests to distribute for free. I mean, 1 billion tests in total to meet future demand.
I expect the real part of this agenda to start taking place as they really start rolling out this new technology. I can't even say it today because you get censored.
This morning, as AT&T and Verizon are launching their new ultra-fast 5G wireless service nationwide.
So they have sent out the mask and the home test in anticipation for something greater. If you expect the worst from these people, When things happen, you don't allow yourself to be sucked in to their plans. I believe it is very naive thinking to believe that they are sending out free masks and free home COVID tests at a time where they believe that the whole pandemic is de-escalating and going away. I think that's naive. It is important to understand what is going on, because while all these reports are being spread, the coverage is not very comprehensive, allowing the general public to have proper expectations of what is to come. We are moving towards war, and peace will be moved from the earth. We are at the beginning of sorrows. Yahushua told us of these things to come in Matthew chapter 24. It's important to understand his warnings and what he has said. Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. That's Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 8. Whatever happens, whether it is war, economic collapse, a high resurgence of what they call the virus, whatever it is, make preparations to be inside your homes for extended lengths of time. Make sure you have a proper supply of food and water in your home. Try to make it so that you do not need to go to the store for emergencies. I have made a video about preparing for the collapse. The link will be at the end of the video. I also have made a preparation list that you can download. That link is in the description box as well. Listen, we all must be awake and ready. That's the beauty of the power that Messiah provides us. The world is asleep, living in this strong delusion, and they can't see through the web of lies, distractions, and manipulations. But we are not asleep, and we are given understanding and discernment so that none of this is able to overcome us. These events are made to come upon us suddenly, without warning. And just like what happened when COVID suddenly came on the scene, they have plans that will be implemented to move further in this world agenda. Everyone should be very mindful of these conflicts brewing, because it will lead to a new world. You do not want to be blindsided and live not aware to the agendas that are taking hold. In order for their new world to come about, they are going to collapse this old world they have created.
Everything they built will fall! And from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one!
This will be a reset of everything in this world. And if you're not spiritually and mentally prepared for it when it comes, you may be driven right into the darkness with them. This is a time where we live awake and focus on the promises of our Messiah. We live in his commands and do not let his day come upon us as a thief in the night. This world is moving aggressively against us all, keeping us distracted and unaware of the gravity of the situation that is coming toward us. We all must not be a part of their agenda, and we must be awake and living in strength and assurity and vigilance. Brothers and sisters, please stay awake and prepared. Stay in prayer. Stay in your faith. Stay in your convictions, resting on our Savior, who is the only one we can put our trust in. Remember, everything that is happening is all about making a world that he is completely out of. If you stay in him, resting and trusting on his promises, not living asleep to the world in front of you, you will overcome and endure over these things to come. You are now up to date on the narrative at hand. Stand up strong in your faith and be ready and be one that overcomes, because he has given you the power to do so. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and the day come upon you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore, and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. That's Luke chapter 21, verses 34 through 36. He told you very clearly. It is your job and duty to keep your heart and soul connected to Messiah. Keep your eyes fixed upon him, and let go of the cares of this life. Do not let his day come upon you unexpectedly, and he will take care of all that you need if you let him guide you through it all. You have been made awake and aware so that you can right now learn to trust him and rest on him. Make that your priority and put it into action now. Rest on him and trust in him. Live your life only for him, and you will be ready. Be blessed. Praise Yah. Okay. Thanks again for watching. I really hope this helps you. If this has blessed you and you think it will bless others, please don't forget to like this and share it with others. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Elohim willing, I try to upload every week. Don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, truthunedited.com. As always, I really would like to thank all those who support this ministry. You know who you are. Your contributions have been an extreme blessing to this ministry, and I'm very thankful for you. Thank you for being a blessing and your continued support to this mission. Okay, thanks again for watching, everyone. I love you all.